John McMullen, the Eagles' schedule is kind of leaking out here a little bit. We know that they'll open against the Redskins. They'll play the Falcons in Week 2. We know that the Giants are on the schedule in Week 14 and in Week 17. That's because Matt Lombardo from NJ.com leaked the entire Giants schedule. I know Josh prompted you off the air. He wanted to know if you were battling Jeff Mosher to leak the schedule, who would get that information first?
Yeah, that would be Mosher, and as I explained to Josh, because I don't care about the schedule. I don't understand. I tell you this every year, Mike. I do.
I will give you. I have an answer to this question. I don't even know what you're going to say, but I have an answer.
All right, shoot.
No, I don't. What is your only thing is?
Oh, well, if you're traveling, it's important for media people. If you're traveling. Or if you're one of those fans that takes trips to cities, I get it. For logistical and planning purposes, I get it. But from a win-loss standpoint, it's absurd to say that now. You don't even know who's on the team, who's injured, who's going to be drafted next week. And everybody plays it's a win, it's a loss game, which I think is laughable at this part of the year. And then you have all these goofy schedules. As I said, everybody said, and anybody who knows the NFL and has been around the NFL, the schedule was finished this week. And you had that story from Sports Business Journal, which is a very credible outlet, said the Vikings were going to play the Eagles on Thanksgiving night. It's not true. Same thing happened last year with Howard Eskin. There was the opener. It was wrong. It's finished this week, and the last part of it is you already know who they're playing. These are just dates. That's it.
Yes. No. The thing I was going to say is there are people that like to plan ahead to see what cities the road games at the Eagles. We know where they're going to go, but the dates, because people like to get those tickets and book their hotels as far in advance as that they can. Like, if the Eagles are going to play Miami in December, that's a game that Eagle fans are going to want to get to.
Well, yeah, and I said put the asterisk on travel and logistics. People who travel, I get it. They want to plan. But for as many Eagles fans that do travel, and this is obviously one of the largest traveling fan bases in the NFL, that's still a minority. The average fan doesn't travel to road games. If they do, maybe one or two a year. But I get the traveling part. That's what I said. I have no problem with the traveling logistics. If you're going to travel, you need to know the dates. But other than that, you already know who they're playing, and it's just a bunch of dates. I don't get it. I shrug my shoulder every year.
Well, we know that the Eagles will open the season against the Redskins, and the Giants will play Dallas. So you got the two NFC East matchups going right at it there, out of the gate. And we also know the Eagles will travel to Atlanta to face the Falcons on a Sunday night game right out of the chute. So you got two games there, and then the two Giant games are going to be Week 14 and Week 17. And while I'm not asking you about wins and losses, you do have
that's a win.
You got two division games. You got two division games in the last 4 weeks of the season.
Well, I'll say this, and I think the Eagles are projecting to have a playoff level roster again early in the process. And if they stay healthy and they're in good shape down the stretch of the season, it's going to be awful nice to have two games against the New York Giants that late. So I think that's very favorable. And then the Patriots game, I think Week 11 leaked out as well. So that's one. But, I think it's very favorable to get the Giants late in the season because if you need wins, they're going to be there for you.
Yeah, and I know 2 years ago they opened in Landover, Maryland against the Washington Redskins. They went on to win the Super Bowl. So you got that going for you. They'll play the Redskins this year, although I don't know if that is a home game. Nope, the game will be at Lincoln Financial Field. So they will host the Redskins at the Linc.
It would be nice to get Landover out of the way Week 1. Because that's such a horrible stadium, horrible setup. But it's Lincoln Financial Field Week 1. So,
and then at Atlanta in week number 2.
Yeah. It's exciting, but it is, the schedule is.
It also makes it feel like tangible that the season is there. Like, I've got 16 games mapped out for me now.
Well, yeah. I'm not. It's very similar. I mean, the NFL has turned everything into an event, and obviously the schedules show, which they have on NFL Network. They've turned it into a big thing. They've turned everything into a big thing. But, you look at the draft coming up next week. I mean, that's tangible. This is, again, once the regular season ends, the way the NFL sets up their schedule, you have everything slotted. So all the teams the Eagles are going to play the next season. You just don't know the order.
Right.
So I don't know. Obviously, I'm in the minority. Everybody gets excited about it. I'm just trying to understand.
Oh, we're giddy over here. No, I'm just kidding. Saints-Falcons, Thanksgiving, but there was some talk that the Eagles would be playing the Vikings, so you don't have to worry about a Eagle. There are no Eagle holiday games this year. It seems that the Eagles have hit the holidays from Thanksgiving to Christmas Eve to Christmas Day to New Year's Eve to New Year's Day for like the last 6 years.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. Josh may have seen this yesterday. Somebody created a Twitter called NFL Schedule Leaks, and everybody was going nuts last night. And the guy was just making things up.
I like it.
And he had the Eagles playing 3 consecutive night games. And I'm like, look at this guy. He's just leaving schedules. And I said, think about this, people. They're not going to play 3 consecutive national television games during the night. But nobody, and sport, as I said, Sports Business Journal, which is an extremely credible outlet. They're the ones who broke the Eagles versus Vikings on Thanksgiving night months ago. And I explained to everybody at the time. I explain it every year. The way the NFL people do the schedule, it is not done until April, until right before they release it. So even if something is penciled in, and I'm going to give SBJ the benefit of the doubt, that was probably penciled in at one point, it doesn't mean anything that early in the process.
Yeah, and I know I do remember that report that the Eagles were going to play the Vikings on Thanksgiving a while back, now that you bring that back up. And obviously that didn't come to fruition. No international game this year. So the Eagles' schedule, pretty straightforward, no holidays. We'll see. They do have the Sunday nighter. It looks like typically they'll play the Giants or the Cowboys on a Monday or a Sunday. So it doesn't – I don't recall either of those Giants games. Was it one of the Giant games at night? I don't remember. Maybe the Week 14 game was a Thursday nighter.
Well, definitely not Week 17 because everything is scheduled early until they see what happens, and then they can flex something. So I do think the Week 14, I don't have it in front of me, I do think that is a night game, but I could be wrong.
John McMullen writes, if Wentz is willing, the Eagles should move quickly on an extension. Now, we broached this conversation a little yesterday. It seems since our conversation, you may have got more of a conviction.
Yeah, well, no, I had a conviction yesterday, but I mean, it's sort of what Joe Banner has always taught Howie Roseman. It's like if you want a player and the Eagles want him, you get it done as early as you possibly can, because the price never goes down. It's just common sense from a financial standpoint. The longer you wait, the price is going up. And if the price doesn't go up, that means something really bad happened. That means either you're not going to want the player, or in the case of Carson Wentz, that's not going to be the case. Then you have, as we mentioned yesterday, you have probably another injury, a concern. And if you don't want him at this time next year, well, guess what? That means you're moving on into a different direction at the most important position in the game. And no one thinks that's going to happen.
No.
I can't think of a scenario where that's going to happen.
Not at all.
Even if he does get hurt, another frustrating injury, It's probably not going to be a career-threatening injury. The odds say that. So what are you waiting on? And my question is, from the Eagles' standpoint, I don't think they're waiting on anything. Howie Roseman confirmed they have started negotiations, essentially. So it's really in Carson Wentz's court at this time, and he's got a decision to make. I think the Eagles would like to get something done, but if he wants to bet on himself and he wants to be that next guy in line, we mentioned all the names, Matt Ryan to Aaron Rodgers, now it's Russell Wilson. If he has a big season, he'll be the highest paid player in the history of football if he wants to bet on himself.
Right. But if he was to sign something now, that probably wouldn't be the case.
No. If he were to sign something now, and that's why from the Eagles' standpoint, if they could get something done, they should run to the table, as I said. And team-friendly deal at this point is 28, 27 million, something in that range. And if they can get that, they should sign immediately.
Right.
And I think the
Eagles, it would behoove the Eagles to get something done now because you would get them for less now. Now, what if he has a season similar to the one that he just had? That would be an interesting conundrum.
Well, similar statistically or similar as far as statistics and injury. I think there's difference. If it's similar statistically, I still think he gets that money. He's in that range. You could argue whether he beats Russell Wilson, but it's going to be more than it is now. He's going to be in that range. I think people kind of forget he was pretty good numbers-wise, even though the Eagles weren't successful, or at least as successful as they would have liked to have been. So from that standpoint, I don't think much changes. If he has another season where he's playing into December or late November and then gets hurt again, that puts a hitch into things, no question about it.
Right.
But again, what I just said, injury-wise, unless it's something significant, and by significant I mean really, really threatening a year or a career, and the odds are against that. The odds says that's probably not going to happen.
Right. Because 2 years ago, if he was going for a contract based on that MVP-esque season, then you're definitively having to give him, the most all-time money. But if he's not that guy and he's closer to the guy from last year where the team's win-loss record is kind of iffy, then the Eagles may, not get burned as much unless they went to him this year right now and just, try to get something done. So their best options, but obviously they don't want him to have a year. They want him to have a year closer to the MVP year.
Yeah, and they expect him to. And they think that he's that player. They think he's the 2017 Carson Wentz. And that's why I say from their perspective, it doesn't make a lot of sense to wait if you can get it done. As I pointed out at 973ESPN.com, it's a two-way street. He's got to be willing to do it as well. But from the team standpoint, they think, obviously, and I think they're correct, there was some rustiness coming back from the ACL and the LCL, and it generally takes a while. So there was a little bit of a step back from the MVP level performance, as you mentioned. They think he's ultimately going to get back to that 2017. And if that's what you think, you got to pull the trigger if you can. I think the Eagles are at that point, just judging from what Howie Roseman said. I think they understand that it's time to get something done if they want to save a little bit of money. And that's been their history. That's been the way they do things, dating all the way back to Joe Banner, even before Howie Roseman.
Yeah, so we'll keep an eye on Wentz if something ends up happening there. Roseman probably trying to get something signed there, and the draft, of course, a week away. A couple other NFL news and notes. By the way, the AAF has confirmed the end of operations, so that is it. They are done. Bankruptcy, Chapter 7, they are done.
And we still haven't heard from Charlie Ebersol, and we won't. I don't think we'll ever see him again.
Just gone.
Well, I don't. Well,
What about Dundon?
To be fair, he can't say anything because there's so many legal proceedings. But yeah, I mean, they actually started a season without having the money to get to week 2. I mean, I don't think anything else explains it better than that.
Does Dundon ever come out?
Yeah, I think ultimately he will once the legal proceedings are done.
Are they in the playoffs, Carolina? Yeah, they actually just did they just beat Tampa?
Yeah.
Oh, that was Columbus.
That was Columbus. Yeah, I'm not a hockey guy.
No, neither.
I do know
they're playing the Capitals right now. By the way, they are down 2-1. They play tomorrow.
That was one of the biggest upsets in recent sports history, Tampa Bay losing, and yes. I didn't know anything about it.
You know what's funny? And I have a whole segment coming up on that and why it's kind of backs my laissez-faire attitude about sports anymore. But
regular season sports.
Yeah. No, that's what I'm saying. Is like. Because somebody asked me, like, is this good? Is this bad? And I said, it just furthers the guy who has the irrational take on a Tuesday night in December. They don't have that irrational take in Tampa Bay. It was 62-16-4. They kicked the crap out of everybody, and they went out and got swept in the first round. It's an epic loss.
Well, yeah, I think one of the major issues, to be honest, and this goes to the NHL, NBA, and Major League Baseball, they kind of let on that the regular season doesn't mean anything. And that's a bad position to take in professional sports because you're charging people a lot of money to go to these games. And back in you don't have to go back very far. You certainly don't have to go back to the 80s, probably 90s into the 2000s. The regular season was still treated well. Now I always make fun of the NBA and I call it the load management. And really it was the San Antonio Spurs who just sit veteran guys. And you're still charging $150 to sit courtside. It's more than that now. It's a bad look for those leagues. And then if you do want to go back and go back to a guy like Wilt Chamberlain, who once played every single minute of an NBA season, because they considered it meaningful. Think about that, Mike.
Yeah.
Every single minute.
Hey, I want to Yeah, go ahead.
And now you got guys just sitting because, as you said, it's a Tuesday in December.
Right, and then it leads us kind of into this story. I want to get your take on it. Who you've covered the NBA, but you're obviously around the NFL now, both nationally and here locally, and you saw what happened with the Sixers. That story. And the Sixers responded, almost immediately on social media.
Yeah, your buddy Dave Schaller.
Right. I mean, so I don't know. I said if that happened, I've never seen that happen before. I said, so what is the answer to them responding that hastily and quickly? Does that suggest that? When they pick and shoot, you don't see that happen. I don't remember that ever happening before. So this tells me that story had to really ruffle some feathers.
Well, it certainly did. If you read it, it should have ruffled some feathers. I think there's a combination, and there's one thing, and I'm not picking on Dave because Dave has got a job to do, and he's got to spin things in a positive direction for the Sixers. Clearly, there were some factual errors in that story, starting with the Bruce Bowen speech, which I think Chris Sheridan had the wrong date, wrong city. So there were things that should have been checked better. But then there's also the mentality that, okay, this is wrong, so that means everything is wrong. I don't think that's necessarily the case. And, I mean, I think there's some issues, no question about it, with the Sixers as far as personalities and letting, let's be honest, some young, immature people do some things that they probably shouldn't be doing. It's happened in the past, though. It happened with Allen Iverson. I mean, those stories are legendary. Sixers just did a better job of spinning things at that time. In this particular case, you go past Ben Simmons. I got people who are there every day that say that organization lets Joel Embiid do whatever the heck he wants. Mm-hmm. And I've been talking about, Mike, I've been talking about Joel Embiid in fitness for years. He's got to get in better shape. And he's a superstar player. And people say, they get really upset, and they say, all NBA players are in shape. I'm talking about NBA shape, NBA level shape. And if you talk to Charles Barkley, and when he came in, obviously he was the round mound of rebound. He will tell you, Moses Malone was there. He was one of the hardest workers ever. Just when you talk about fitness, he was just in better shape than everybody else. And that's why he became the superstar he was.
I did hear, I heard Kendrick Perkins, who was a role player, but won a championship, lasted in the league for 14 years. The one thing he did say was he wishes he was in better shape throughout the whole thing because he thought he could have played long. He was a guy who came out of high school.
Yeah, and it happens to a lot of younger players. But when you see it with somebody who's got that much talent and that much ability, and you get to the end of the season and you just see certain things, it gets frustrating, and you don't have a veteran sort of mentality like Moses Malone pushing the younger players. And maybe it's just a generational thing. Elton Brand's there now. I think that's helpful. But there are some issues with that team, and I think you're there enough to understand that. I don't think that's surprising, or it shouldn't be surprising.
No, and we talked a little earlier about, look, young players. You had Durant, Harden, and Westbrook, 3 MVPs. They were all on the same team. You would say 3 MVPs all on the same team, and they couldn't win because those guys were young and immature and not ready to handle being a championship core at that time. You put those 3 guys together now, they probably win a championship together.
Well, and chemistry plays into it as well. I mean, all you have to do is look at the Olympics. And for years and years and years, the USA would just take the best players and blow everybody's doors off. And then all of a sudden, the rest of the world started catching up. And it was unthinkable at one point. The U.S. didn't win the gold. And then a dirty word in this city, Colangelo, in this case Jerry, took over, and he built it more as a team. And it wasn't about just taking, okay, this guy's the best player, this guy's the best player.
Well, that's how Andre Iguodala is an Olympian.
Yeah, it was about fitting players in chemistry and getting the shooter and getting the spacing and getting the defender. That plays into it as well. So they're still in the process of that, and they're going to have games.
Right, and people would say they got Butler and they got Harris, and the problem is you just mentioned chemistry. They've only played together for 10 days, so their 2 stars are the 2 youngest players on the team. Their 2 veterans have been there the least amount of time.
Yeah, and I think they're going to ultimately win this series and probably bow out in the second round, and then you got to see what happens, and you got to keep building from there. But yeah, it's not a ready-made product yet.
A week from tomorrow, NFL draft. All right, pick 25. We will talk draft and plenty more. All coming up. John McMullen, of course, football at 4 right here on the Sports Bash Live on 97.3 ESPN. By the way, draft party. We are we've got a ton of people registering already. It's going to be a huge blowout. And tomorrow we'll have another Sports Bash Draft Party keyword, 3 o'clock. Download the app so you can get the keyword sent to your phone. Okay, man, we'll talk tomorrow.
All right, thanks, Mike.
John McMullen, like all guests, appeared via the Boardwalk Honda hotline.